This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com. To find out how you can help kickstart our latest show, Live from Bay 6, visit our website and click on the Kickstarter button. This episode of Sketchup, a 3D Toolbox, is brought to you by 3D Connection, makers of the Space Navigator. To learn more about them, visit their website at www.3dconnection.com. Hey there everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sketchup, a 3D Toolbox. I'm Cameron Harris, and this is episode number 25. Today we're going to start a new project series. We're going to start modeling a small house. Now we've done just a single living room before, but now we're actually going to be combining big clusters of rooms to create an actual house. And we're going to start today with the walls and floor. Let's get started. So to start off with, I just have a blank project, just a brand new SketchUp project that I've deleted the little man from. And now I'm going to start modeling my small house. Now, we've done rooms before, individual rooms, but modeling multiple rooms linked together is a little bit different, and there are certain techniques that we'll need to use for that. Today, we're just going to focus on the floor and the walls of our house. And to start with, we pretty much just start like we were doing a normal room. And I like to start with whatever the first room you enter into the house will be. The entry hall, the foyer, whatever you want to call it. So I'm actually going to start by using the rectangle tool, R for the rectangle tool. I'm going to start at the origin. My cursor snaps to this origin right here where all of the axes kind of converge. That's an optional place to begin, but I really like to start there. That way, it just kind of keeps everything nice and centered. And I want this to be a nice little hallway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this maybe, let's say, 8 feet wide. And I'm going to make it 10 feet long. There we go. So I've got a nice little floor right here to start with. Now, I don't like my floor to be in 2 dimensions. I don't like it to be perfectly flat like this. I want to have some depth. I want it to be like a little slab on which I can start building my house. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the push-pull tool, and right away I'm going to extrude this into 3D. And I'm going to make it 6 inches tall. That's what I like to make my slabs. You could make it an inch or a foot or whatever you want to make it. And now I've got a nice little slab for my room. The next step is I'm actually going to use the offset tool. You remember we used that in our last episode when we were modeling a small cluster of rooms from a floor plan. But this is from scratch. But even so, we're going to use the offset tool because it just works so perfectly for this. And the offset tool is either up here in the toolbar, or you can get it over here in the tool palette, or you can use my preferred method, which is, of course, the keyboard shortcut F for offset. Nice way to think about it. And I'm going to start on this upper face right here. I'm going to click once, just once. I always have that trouble. And now I can stretch this out or in. I'm going to go in with this. And I want this to be offset 6 inches. That's a typical depth for a wall, an interior wall. So that's perfect right there. And now the next thing I want to do is, this is now its own face, this little ring right here. And I want to extrude this up. And now I have my walls. But you'll notice that when I do that, I lose that little line on the outside. You'll notice that this right here, this line is right where my slab is, and then after that, it's the walls. But when I push and pull it up, I lose that line. The line moves with my push-pull tool. What I can do instead, and what I'm going to have you do instead, is before you use the push-pull tool, hit the Option key, and you'll get that little plus right there. You'll basically be dragging up a copy of this. You notice I keep my little line right down there, and that's going to come in very handy when we start adding on more rooms, and you'll see why in a minute. So I'm just going to make these 8 feet tall. There we go. Typical ceiling height. And that's my entry hall. Now, one thing I do want to point out here, and that's a little bit tricky with the offset tool, is if I switch to the tape measure tool, T for tape measure, and just measure this width right here, this is saying, down at my dimensions box, this is saying that my length is only 7 feet. But I made this room 8 feet wide. What's going on here? Well, you have to keep in mind that when you use the offset tool, it's going to offset in my case, 6 inches on either side. So I lost 6 inches of depth here and 6 inches of depth here. So I basically lose a foot on each side. And I also lost it this way as well. So like I may have made this a 10-foot long room, but once I use the offset tool, it's only 9 feet. Now, you might be tempted to maybe use the offset tool instead of going in, go out like this. And you could certainly do that, but the trouble is that if you do your rooms like that, it gets way harder, actually, for some reason. It's just kind of, things start to intersect with each other, and making a room bigger than it already is just gets really tricky when you're modeling a house. So what I like to do instead is just think of that before I actually start modeling my room. If I think, okay, I want this to be an 8-foot by 10-foot room, remember just to add 6 inches to all 4 sides, or 1 foot on one side and 1 foot above. So instead of 8 foot by 10 foot, I would have drawn this at 9 feet by 11 feet. And then I would have gotten an 8 foot by 10 foot dimension on the inside. But in this case, 7 feet wide is actually just fine, although it is looking not exactly long enough. It's looking a little bit short. I'd like this to come out more. So what I'm going to show you now is how you can actually edit a room that you've already built. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swing around here. I'm going to make this the front of my house. So I'm going to have this stretch backwards like this. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to extrude out my slab right down here. So let's see here. Let's think about this. If this is currently 10 feet, let's say I want to make it 15 feet instead. So I'll extrude this out 5 feet. So I'll just use the push-pull tool and pull this out 5 feet. Perfect. And then I'm going to do the same thing to this face right here. Extrude it out. And I'm actually just going to snap to this other face that I've already extruded here. Good. And now the last step is to push this wall back so that instead of a 5.5 foot thick wall, I only have a half of a foot, 6 inches. So I'm just going to select this and push it back, just like the others, 5 feet. And there we go. So now I've got a nice longer room. So that's how you can edit a room once it's already been made. So we've got a very nice entry hall right here. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a room on this side. But I don't want it to just be the same depth. I actually would like it to just be like right in here. I want to keep this part kind of sticking out from the rest of the house. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw a guide. Use the tape measure tool, click on this side right here, this line, and let's have this go back 5 feet. So I'm going to have my room just be within here. I'm going to have this part sticking out. So what I want to do now is I want to use my guide as a guide, imagine that, for a line right here. And that's going to, there we go, split this face in half like this, split it in 2. So I can now edit this face without affecting this face. I'm going to go ahead and delete my guide. Now remember, because we have separated our walls from our slab, you do need to do the same thing to your slab right here. Just draw another quick line here. Now you might think, why don't you just, why not just make the whole thing, you not have the slab on the outer rim? You would be able to skip this step. Trust me on this. This is where having the slab separate really comes in handy, because what I can do now is I can just click right here with the push-pull tool and pull this slab out like that. Right? Very nice. So let's say I want this to be 15 feet long. Make it a nice big room. So 15 feet. But keep in mind, I'm going to have a wall right here. I've already got a wall here, so I don't need to worry about that. But I'm going to have a wall cutting in 6 inches right here. Now, do I want to go ahead and just make the length of the room 14.5? Or would I like to keep it 15 and add another 6 inches? I'm actually going to add another 6 inches to my slab here. There we go. So now I have a 15.5 long slab that will end up being 15 feet on the inside once I add my walls out here. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. This is a nice little tip for when you're modeling multiple rooms next to each other. If I were to do the same thing I did with my hallway, just use the offset tool like this, 6 inches, pull it up 8 feet. It looks fine, But there's one problem. You can see right in here, these two walls right next to each other. Well, they're two walls right next to each other. I have double thick walls right here. So I have walls that are a foot thick instead of 6 inches. That's going to be a problem because no house really has that thick walls. So what I want to do is, in my last episode, I showed you a very easy way to get rid of it was just kind of use the line tool to kind of divide this. And then you can kind of push this back down. But then you'd have to get rid of these lines here as well that it leaves behind. And it's just not a very easy, quick, or convenient way of doing it. Instead, there's a much better way. Normally, the offset tool just copies, makes an offset of whatever it is, whatever face you hover over. So it could be that face, could be that face, could be that face. Doesn't matter. But you can have a little bit more control over what exactly it is that you're offsetting if you select it first. Now, I'm not talking about selecting the face before you select the offset tool because that's just going to limit it to that face. It's not going to do anything different. What I'm going to have you do instead is, remember, we want to have walls on this side, and this side. We don't want to have a wall here. So I'm going to select that line, and that line. That's where I want my walls. I'm not selecting this line because I don't want a wall there. Then I'm going to switch to the offset tool. And you notice that I'm not able to just hover over any old face I want. It's limited to my selection now. Going to click once. Oops. There we go. And now when I drag in, you'll notice it looks like it's doing the same thing, but look over here. It's not copying, it's not offsetting that line because I didn't have that line selected. It's basically just giving me the walls on the sides that I selected, not giving me an extra wall over here. So this is perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and offset this 6 inches. And now, push-pull tool. Now if I just pull this up like this, I lose this line that I have down here that I like. So I'm going to hit the Option key first, get that little plus sign, extrude this up, snap it over to these walls here. And there we go. So now I've got another room right there. The last thing I want to do, and this is just me, but I really like to go in and then select these little dividing lines right there on these joints. Just makes it a little bit prettier, a little bit easier to work with later on. So now I've got my first room extension. So that is fantastic. Now I want to add another room over here, and I'm going to go a little bit faster this time. And just like before, I'm going to use the guide and offset it back 5 feet. Basically, I'm just going to do the same thing I did on the other side, 5 feet. And here's a nice tip. Instead of having to do the line like that and then the line for the slab, you can actually do both at the same time. Just splice right across that little dividing line right there. Saves you some steps. Select the guide, get rid of it. Pull out the slab, 15 feet. Select my outer lines because I don't want a wall out here. Offset tool, push-pull tool, hit the Option key so I'll keep my dividing line for my slab. There we go. Select that line there, that line there. Boom. Very quick, very easy, and now I've got my entry hall as well as a room on either side. So that's great. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to add a nice big room but with a slight dividing wall out here. And I'll show you how you can do that next. But first I want to thank the guys who make this show possible, 3D Connection. Now 3D Connection, as I'm sure you know by now, are makers of the Space Navigator, which is, in my opinion, the best way to navigate in SketchUp. The very best way there is. And that's because it's just so intuitive, it's so smooth, it's so easy to use, but at the same time, it's actually way more accurate. Say I was trying to zoom in on a very specific corner of my model. If I was using, regular mouse and keyboard shortcuts, it would take me some doing to zoom in on a specific point because I have to switch tools to get to different types of movement, and it's just not really all that great. Whereas with The Space Navigator, if I want to get to a specific point, I can just move myself right in at that point and get as close as I want. It's just really, really very intuitive and very accurate, surprisingly so, actually. Way more accurate than keyboard and mouse shortcuts, and you can get there so much faster. These guys are just great. I want you to check them out. Their website is www.3dconnection.com. Check out the Space Navigator. You are going to love it if you end up getting one, and it is going to save you a lot of time in SketchUp. And I want to thank them so much for their support of this episode of SketchUp, a 3D toolbox. Okay, so I've got the beginnings of my house back here, and now what I want to do is I want to add on another couple of rooms back here. And I'm going to start by just doing one big room. So I'm going to show you a pretty neat way that you can do this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the push-pull tool, and I'm going to pull this back slab right here out. And you can see it's keeping these lines right here because it was divided by these lines here, but that doesn't matter. So let's pull this out maybe another 15 feet. Good. Now, I don't want this to just be this entire width. I'd like to push it back a few feet on either side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the line tool to divide up my slab right here. And then I'm going to use the push-pull tool to push this part of the slab back. Maybe, let's say 5 feet. Good. And then we're going to do the same thing on this side right here. Push it back 5 feet. Oops, did 5 inches there. Gotta make sure you add the apostrophe to make it 5 feet. There we go. Okay. So now I've got my slab for these rooms. Now, I don't really need these dividing lines in the back here, so I'm just going to get rid of these here. Make it all nice and seamless. Okay, so I've got the beginnings of my next group of rooms right here. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add these exterior walls here. So I'm going to do that by selecting the lines that I want. I don't want a wall here, so I'm going to leave that unselected. And then offset these 6 inches in. Pull up a copy for my walls. There we go. Perfect. Just going to select these dividing lines right here. Whoops. Be careful. Some of these lines you think, oh yes, I'll just get rid of this line, but really it actually needs that line to make sure that it keeps all of the faces that you need, keeping them in existence. Because remember, a face needs to be surrounded on all sides by a line, otherwise it can't exist. And you notice when I got rid of this line here, got rid of all of it. So I'm just going to undo and keep those there, because those are actually keeping this back wall face right here in existence. So what I'm going to do now is, this is a nice start, but this room is really big. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add some walls in here. So let's say I want to have this little corner right here be a small room. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the rectangle tool in this case, start back in this corner, and just kind of pull out like this. And I'm going to make it maybe, let's make it 10 feet square. But remember, I want to add 6 inches to either side. I don't need walls in the back, so it's not going to be a foot, just going to be 6 inches. So I'll make it 10.5 feet by 10.5 feet. Boom. There we go. Very nice. So that's perfect. And now what I want to do is I want to select just these two outer lines right here. And I want to then offset them in 6 inches. Pull up a copy. There we go. So now I've got a nice little 10 by 10 room right there. That's perfect. But I'm noticing that that's making this part right here very, very skinny. Don't really want it that skinny. So I'm going to maybe pull this back 3 feet. I like this because these walls here are actually lining up very nicely. Don't want to push this back, but I do want to push this back a little bit. So I'm going to do the reverse of what I did on the entry hallway. I'm just going to pull this back maybe 3 feet. Oops. 3 feet. Having trouble hitting the apostrophe key today for some reason. And then push this back 3 feet. So that leaves me a nice amount of space right here, nice space right here for a bathroom or something. Very nice. And I keep the rest of this pretty open. So that's very nice. Now the last thing I want to do is I actually want to get rid of one of these walls. This wall right here. I want the hallway to just go very smoothly into this big open living room area. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to get rid of this wall. Now at the moment, if I use the push-pull tool and just kind of try and pull this wall down, well, that's not going to work because the rest of the walls are getting selected too. And you're going to find that a lot. I can't really use like a doorway because I don't want a doorway. I just don't want a wall there at all. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the line tool and I'm going to divide up the top here. Put a line there. You can see these two walls line up perfectly. That's very nice. And I'll put another line right here. So now this part of the wall is its own face. And as such, I can edit it without affecting any of the others. If I select it and push it down, and then put it right flush with the floor, boom, I now have gotten rid of that wall, and this is now transitioning beautifully into that hallway. Except, of course, for these weird lines that are left over right here. And for that, I like to use the eraser tool. E for the eraser tool, and just swipe over those. Get rid of them on that wall and that floor. We need this one because it's the corner, but we don't need that extra one right there. There we go. Perfect. So now we've got a nice slab on which we can on which we've built all of our walls, and we've got all of our walls for our individual rooms. So that's all we're going to do for this episode. In our next episode, we're going to start adding the doorways and the windows that'll link all these rooms together and give us a view to the outside. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Sketchup, a 3D Toolbox. I'm really looking forward to our next episode where we're actually going to start working with doors and windows. But until then, be sure to visit our website at www.harwoodpodcast.com. I'll have the show notes there, links to all of our other episodes, great stuff. And if you have any questions or comments for me about this show, any future shows, anything at all, you can just send me an email at cameron@harwoodpodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'll just say goodbye and good modeling.